Jim never imagined that a quiet stranger would walk into his bakery one morning and change his life with a single act of kindness. It was an early morning in Bakersfield, California, and the faint smell of freshly baked donuts and bread filled the air of Jim's homestyle bakery. But despite the inviting aromas, Jim Lee Chang's mood was anything but cheerful. His bakery, nestled between a laundromat and a hardware store, had seen better days. The steady flow of customers had dwindled to a trickle, and the tough economy wasn't helping. On top of that, Jim was struggling with mounting personal challenges. At 58, Jim had always worked hard. For decades, he and his wife Linda had run the bakery together. Her laughter once echoed through the tiny kitchen, and her touch was evident in every frosted cake and batch of cookies. But 6 months ago, Linda had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive illness, and her condition had quickly worsened. Medical bills piled up, and Jim found himself stretched thin, physically, emotionally, and financially. Each day he woke at 4 a.m. to prepare the bakery, hoping for a rush of customers that never came. The loyal regulars could barely cover the bills, let alone Linda's treatment. Every evening, Jim would return home to sit by Linda's bedside, pretending everything was okay, though it hadn't been for a long time. On one particular Thursday, the sky was overcast, reflecting Jim's mood. The bakery's display case held a handful of donuts, glazed, chocolate, and jelly-filled, neatly arranged as if begging to be noticed. As Jim wiped his flour-dusted hands on his apron, he gazed out the window. The street outside was eerily quiet, almost deserted. That's when he saw him, a tall figure, dressed in a black hoodie and jeans, walking toward the bakery with unhurried but purposeful steps. The bell above the door jingled as the man entered. "Morning," Jim greeted, masking his exhaustion with a smile. The young man nodded in acknowledgement. There was something about him, his posture confident, yet his expression carried an unmistakable kindness. The man slowly approached the counter, his sharp blue eyes scanning the donuts, as if contemplating something much more significant than pastries. Jim stood silently, watching the stranger. "Got a favorite?" Jim asked, breaking the silence, hoping to lighten the heavy air between them. The young man looked up, his gaze meeting Jim's with intensity. "Not sure," he replied softly. "What do you recommend?" Jim scratched his chin and chuckled lightly. "Well, the jelly-filled ones are popular. People say they remind them of their childhood. But if you want something classic, you can't go wrong with a glazed." The man nodded thoughtfully but didn't rush to make a decision. Instead, he looked at the donuts with a careful consideration, as if deciding something much more profound. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" the man asked suddenly. Jim raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. Most people didn't care about the history of his little bakery. "Yeah, almost 30 years, Jim replied. "My wife and I started it together. She used to handle all the decorating. She's got an eye for that sort of thing." His voice faltered, and he quickly busied himself with rearranging napkins on the counter. The man noticed, but didn't press. "She doesn't anymore," Jim added after a beat. His voice was quiet, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The young man nodded in sympathy, then leaned on the counter. "I'm sorry to hear that. It can't be easy." Jim shrugged, offering a tight-lipped smile. "You do what you gotta do." But his eyes betrayed the burden he carried. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The man's gaze returned to the donuts, his mind seemingly elsewhere. Finally, he straightened up. "I'll take 'em all," he said, his tone calm and decisive. Jim blinked. "All of them?" The man nodded. "Every single one." Jim stared, stunned. "That's over 5 dozen donuts," he said, trying to process it. The man simply smiled and pulled out a sleek black wallet. "That's fine, pack them up for me." Jim hesitated. He had seen all kinds of people over the years, and this seemed almost too good to be true. "You serious?" The man's gaze was steady. "I'm serious." Still in disbelief, Jim began packing the donuts, glazed, chocolate, powdered sugar, jelly-filled, his mind racing. Who was this guy, and why was he buying every donut in the shop? "Planning a party or something?" Jim asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "No party," the man replied with a soft chuckle. "Let's just say I have my reasons." When Jim finished packing, he stacked the boxes on the counter. "That'll be $235. Without hesitation, the man handed over his credit card. Jim swiped it and glanced at the name embossed on the card, Barron Trump. He froze. He'd heard the name before, though he hadn't paid much attention to politics. Still, this wasn't just any customer. Jim couldn't help but feel a strange sense of recognition. As Jim handed the receipt back, Barron slid an envelope across the counter. "This is for you," he said. Jim stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "Open it later," Barron replied. "Take the day off. Spend it with your wife." Jim was thrown off by the request. "I can't just close the bakery. I need the money, the bills." "You've worked hard enough," Barron interrupted gently. "Trust me, it's all taken care of." Before Jim could protest further, Barron picked up the boxes and headed for the door. The bell jingled again as he left, leaving Jim standing there with the envelope in hand, unsure of what had just happened. After a moment, Jim's curiosity got the best of him, and he opened the envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten note and a stack of cash. $10,000. "Jim, your story moved me more than I can say. You remind me of what truly matters in life. Family, love, and resilience. Take this and use it for whatever you need, whether it's for your wife's care or just some peace of mind. You deserve a break. All the best, Barron." Jim's hands trembled as he counted the money. Overwhelmed, he sank onto a stool, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't the type to cry, but at that moment, the kindness of this stranger hit him like a tidal wave. He couldn't believe it, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just about the money. It was about something bigger. Jim didn't close the bakery right away. He needed a moment to process everything, the envelope, the note, the unexpected gift. But as he looked around the shop, he realized this wasn't just luck. Something profound had just happened. By noon, Jim flipped the sign to close. He had a box of Linda's favorite pastries in hand and drove home. For the first time in months, the weight in his chest eased. Linda was resting in her favorite chair when he walked in. The sunlight bathed her in a soft glow, and her tired eyes brightened when she saw him. "Jim, what are you doing home so early?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He knelt beside her and took her hand. "Something incredible happened today," he said, placing the pastries on the table. "A customer came in and bought every donut. Then he left us enough money to cover your treatments for months." Linda's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed his hand. "Who would do something like that?" Jim hesitated. "Barron Trump," he said softly. Linda's jaw dropped, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other. It was the first time in a long time that Jim allowed himself to hope. The next morning, Jim reopened the bakery, unsure of what to expect. Word of Barron's kindness had spread. A line of people stretched down the block, with locals eager to show their support. The bakery, once struggling to survive, had become a symbol of hope. Jim realized that the real gift Barron had given him wasn't just money. It was the reminder that kindness, no matter how small or unexpected, could spark something extraordinary. Weeks later, the bakery was thriving and Jim's heart was lighter. Every day, customers came in with stories of how Barron's act of kindness had inspired them to give back. Some donated to charity, others volunteered, and a few even started their own kindness campaigns. For Jim, the money was a blessing, but it was the ripple effect of Barron's kindness that truly stayed with him. The bakery was no longer just a place for pastries. It had become a hub of hope, and that was worth more than any dollar amount. One quiet afternoon, a young boy came into the bakery. Jim gave him a donut on the house, remembering that simple act of kindness had changed everything for him. Life would always have its challenges, but Jim knew now that even in the darkest times, a single light of kindness could make all the difference. And he was determined to keep passing it on.